This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to A Sharp Outlook on K4HD Radio and Talk or TV. I am Angela Sharp, your host. Our armchair discussions with industry experts will give you the steps, tools, and information to be successful in business and to prepare you to be your best self. Hello, I'm Angela Sharp, and I'm so excited that you're here on A Sharp Outlook today. We have had like a pattern of podcasts talking about becoming a small business, growing your business, getting financing for your business, doing federal contracting. And today, all of these things are leading up to one thing, and that is being able to maintain that relationship and those funds because you are in compliance with all of the rules, the regulations, and the goals and objectives of the funders. And so this is going to be exciting. This is for the small business owner. This is for the minority business owner. This is for the indigenous businesses. This is for, those that are thinking about starting a business and wanting to know what their responsibilities are. So I'm saying this show is specifically for you, and you know people who need this information. So you need to contact them right now and tell them we're getting ready to get started, to tell them how to stay in compliance. Because if you don't, you can lose the money. And I don't think that's what you would want to happen when you have such a great program going, an organization going at the time. So we want to make sure that you stay in compliance. And my guest today is going to be able to tell you all about what to do to be in compliance. My guest today is David Neal. David Neal is a former federal contracting officer with nearly 15 years of government service. David brings a dual perspective understanding of how federal acquisition decisions are evaluated, documented, and defended, and how some decisions are experienced on the industry side. His work focuses on governance, compliance, discipline, and the risk-informed decision-making across high-value, complex federal programs. He frequently writes and speaks on bridging the gap between compliance and judgment to reduce friction between government and contractors. And I want to welcome David to the show right now so he can help you understand what your responsibilities are. Hi, David.
Hi, Angela. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, it is a pleasure because, like I said, we've been talking about everybody trying to get the money, but how do you know you're keeping track of the money properly so you don't have to give the money back? You know what I'm saying?
Of course, it's a difficult environment. When people think about federal contracting compliance, you immediately go to the FAR, those regulations. What are the rules? What are the right clauses? You got to make sure to check the box, and that all matters. But having spent all this time as a contracting officer, now working on the industry side, I can tell you that's not where most compliance failures kind of actually originate.
Right. And so there's so much to learn today. Get your paper and pencils. From your perspective, we're looking at organization and determining whether governance and accountable mechanisms are in place and function effectively. But from your perspective, what signals tell you an organization is positioned for compliance success versus reactive oversight?
No, great question. And, we hear a lot and talk about like best practices in this space. And now even being on the industry side, I found myself even less interested in whether organizationally we can have program managers, project managers reciting FAR clauses, but more interested in what the organization can explain in a way that is going to survive scrutiny, why decisions were made, and whether those decisions can be defended when you're not in the room to provide context. So the fundamental question I ask is government intentional or is it accidental? And I think you can tell this pretty quickly. Proactive organizations understand why the funds were awarded. They know what constraints come with those funds. They know who's accountable for the various decisions at each stage of the contract lifecycle. I think that's that intentional governance. Reactive organizations, and being on the government side, can be very reactive because you're always behind schedule. You don't know when the money's coming. And so they're focused on execution first. And that's okay. There's missions, but then they can assume that they can document, explain things later. And so whether that's government or a contractor. And so those assumptions tend to fail because the later, that context is evaporated. People moved on. You're trying to reconstruct something rather than defer to what was captured that you're aware of. And so these organizations don't fall because it lacks controls. They sometimes fail because authority was never clearly assigned. Policies did, but that accountability didn't. And so from an oversight perspective, that could sometimes be worse than having no policy at all.
Yeah. I've been in the financial position as the controller, CFO, director of finance, VP of finance in some of the nonprofit organizations that were receiving funds from the federal government and from philanthropy funds. And one of the things I would always say when that money comes in, let's have a meeting and let's talk about what your goals and objectives are supposed to be so that as a program manager of that particular program that was funded, that you've got to keep track of specific data so that you can prove and, like you say, answer those questions, that you're bringing up. So effective management as a compliance and risk control, why does clear ownership and accountability matter more than organizational size or sophistication?
Yeah, effective management, I feel sometimes is one of the more underrated compliance controls. And what I've observed is, that clear ownership matters far more than organizational size or sophistication. I've seen, very small teams, say under 10 people, that performed exceptionally well under audit and oversight scrutiny. Someone may ask why. I think because everyone knew exactly who had decision authority for what. There wasn't any confusion. But compare that to, say, larger organizations with multiple layers, management, formal delegations of authority. Sometimes they couldn't even answer basic questions about who approved certain actions. And so it can work against you sometimes the larger you are if you don't scale accordingly and grow and develop those compliance issues, metrics, procedures as well.
Right. Yeah. Especially the larger they get, they're so distant from what's the operation of the organization itself. They're just have their little program. They forget the oversight that's needed for the payment of expenses or the documenting of the funds. And so they're not communicating with the departments that are actually maybe handling all of the finance part and, documenting whether or not this goes to this grant or disallowed funds and all these other things. The finance people may not know what you know. And so I always used to say, if you're the program manager, these funds are coming in, you need to have a meeting with finance so you can talk about how the work is going to be delegated. And then you need to be communicating on a monthly basis at the minimum so that everything's being documented correctly. So
exactly. Yeah. I mean, meeting or clear communication, we could preach it until we're probably blue in the face, till but it's lacking. And at the end of the day, if you can communicate, be persistent, but it'll go far, far greater than just trying to make an assumption. And so clearly establishing things up front really helps.
Definitely helps. Collecting and maintaining documentation that supports decisions. From your experience, where do organizations most misunderstand what adequate documentation really means.
This is a big one. And, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you look just what's going on in the GovCon space, there's various audits, there's scrutiny, and what does it come down to? Documentation. And this is where a lot of organizations fundamentally misunderstand what that documentation's for. And, they think it just exists to record a transaction, to show that something happened. In reality, the documentation exists to explain your decisions, to show why something was reasonable at the time it occurred. And the brutal truth about how this actually works in practice is, a contracting decision is lived once, but read many times. Mm-hmm. In that moment, that decision is made with people in the room, with interruptions on the calendar, missing information, non-negotiable deadlines. There's urgency and pressure, and there's also constraints.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've worked in these capacities in interim positions while a permanent person's being hired. Mm-hmm. And I have seen where they had support, but when I went in to review the support, because we're getting ready and prepare for the audit, I could see this definitely is not the support for this particular transaction or this particular thing that you have done. And so you either got to come up with some kind of explanation as to why you have changed the direction that was going on, and then you need to try to get some agreement from the funder that it was okay or appropriate. Of course, you're usually supposed to do it before you go and spend those funds, but sometimes, if you didn't,
not the reality, right? So you have to make those risk decisions.
Yeah.
And, you want to make sure you're supporting documentation. I usually think to answer 3 fundamental questions: what was decided, why was it reasonable at the time, and mm-hmm. who made the decision?
Right.
Anything else is going to become vulnerable under review. And right. It's not because it was wrong, but it's going to be very hard to defend. And even, as you pointed out, trying to do it after the fact.
Yes.
Auditors can tell.
Oh yeah, they can tell. And the thing is, a lot of them say, if you want to make a change, contact your contract officer and explain to them that I would like to change some of these funds, because we found out once we started working in the program, there was another additional need. Don't do it on your own, and then try to explain, because it's going to be disallowed. Maybe, but
the thing, and that goes right to, are you notifying the right person? And mm-hmm. I see it a lot now on the industry side, where you're not always, and most often aren't engaging daily or weekly, maybe not even monthly, with the contracting officer. It's contracting officer representative, it's your customer program folks. And so when things arise, what I try to really instill in people is, you're not going around your contracting officer representative. Let them know what's going on. Let them know you need to engage with the contracting officer, and then reach out. The contracting officers want to be involved. They mm-hmm. want to hear if there's something that they need to help work through. Yes, they're busy, but it's going to be much easier to loop them in sooner than later.
Right. And the one thing I always used to tell people, because there's this assumption out there that contracting officers are just the gotcha people.
Right.
And instead, you are their friend, helping them to succeed in that program that they are working at. And if you really would just open up, be honest, have discussions, know them so well, you call them by their first name, they know you went on vacation, just, have a casual conversation so that you can get that trust built up between the two of you, and tell them you're thinking about doing something, get their opinion, find out if it's going to cause a problem for you. That's what communication is supposed to be, so that you clarify, decision making. You just, it really is a good thing. But like I said, a lot of people just feel, oh, well, it's the government. Oh, they didn't want me to have the money in the first place. I mean, all of this stuff that comes up, I've heard over the years, and that is not what's really happening. They're wanting you to be successful because they are accountable also. So,
exactly. trying, everyone has the same end game, really, is to support the warfighter, to, help the government complete a successful mission. The government needs contractors. Unfortunately, because I've seen it throughout my time, there is sometimes this adversarial or government thinking the contractor is just, trying to get one over and make more money. When reality is a lot of times, the schedule is rushed and these requirements aren't fully developed. Ideally, they should be, but the reality is they're not. And so that creates risk. And then if that doesn't manifest or something deviates, we have to be able to have an open discussion. And with documentation, communication, those things become much easier to sell and justify.
Right. And then there comes the evaluation and the closeout. And most of them resist having to do that, especially using a third party. But why do evaluations and closeout tend to expose weaknesses that existed long before the end of the performance?
No, this is a great one, and I could do a whole podcast on evaluations and closeout. Oftentimes they don't usually create new problems. They surface old ones that were hidden by the operational momentum of getting everything done, and we'll deal with these types of things later or any issues. On the evaluation side, it provides governance feedback. Tells you whether assumptions held up, tells you whether your controls worked, whether your decisions were defensible under any scrutiny they received. When it's done poorly, that evaluation becomes a box checking exercise that provides a false confidence. It tells you that you completed the work, but not whether you did it in a way that's going to survive review.
Right.
Those are similar. Organizations always just treat it as paperwork, wrapping up the financials, closing everything out, but it's also risk mitigation. It's that last opportunity to ensure that the record aligns the way that, regardless of what side, but you hopefully want it to align with both parties, with both sides agreeing that, hey, this is the final outcome. Everything went the way it was supposed to.
Right. Because you certainly don't want to find out that you didn't actually meet the goals and objectives that you wrote the proposal about in the first place.
And I see that happen a lot, actually. That was a surprising thing coming on the industry side, how often that it just goes through the entire, it can be a multiple year performance period. And then at the end, they're de-obligating money on a firm fixed price contract and it's not making sense. And so it's like, well, what happened? What's their documentation look like? What's the history? And if that's absent, it creates a hard job to try to say, hey, we're still owed this or recover at that point when you haven't engaged much sooner.
Yeah. And it's heartbreaking because, a lot of these programs, there's something that was really needed and they really were getting ready to change the lives of citizens and maybe in their community or citizens that, are disadvantaged or people that really need the services, and for them not to be successful in that program and it has to end, that is going to be devastating, not just to the people doing the work, but the recipients. So this is a serious, really serious situation. Have somebody come in and make sure you're on track and you're doing this, and if you're going to have a gotcha moment, let it be at a period where it's not at the end of your contract. So whatever corrections you need to make, you can get it done. And in fact, you remediated whatever the problems were, and now you've got a good flowing program. But sometimes you just don't have all of this, skilled people on your program that maybe could have guided you so you could avoid not meeting the objectives. But yeah, I've seen some pretty bad, and it is really devastating.
It is. And it happens on both sides of the table here where, we get too wrapped up on the nuances, on the policy and procedure, and that matters. But then there's the real human live impact here of what we're doing, or a government decision or a contractor decision. always try to support 360 feedback, even on the government side. Government doesn't like hearing that they're doing something wrong, but it's okay.
Right.
Like, no one's perfect. We're all here to help. And that's really, and I found myself very successful on this side, trying to just approach things the same way, helping understand. Again, there's a lot of smart people on the government side, but their job is probably the hardest it's been in a long time. And it doesn't, they're trying to make it easier. And I hope that we're successful in acquisition reform and training and development, a lot of these acquisition professionals. But again, try to help them as much as possible. Hire people if you're on the contractor side that, understand what the government is trying to do, and ask and figure it out, and just help them do their job a little bit better.
Right.
Make it easier. You're not trying to tell them they're wrong or that they're doing something that they shouldn't, but help them see a benefit to doing something maybe a different way.
Right. Definitely. Different approaches can be just dynamic, make such a difference. And then technology and compliance. How has the expanded use of technology changed compliance oversight, and where do organizations mistakenly assume tools can replace professional judgment?
This is a great one. I mean, obviously, with the increase in the use of artificial intelligence tools, and now the government's, adapting and tailoring this technology. And so it's unquestionably improved, whether that's traceability and consistency and compliance management. Modern systems can enforce workflows, retain records, flag anomalies, reduce manual errors. And those are real meaningful improvements, but it doesn't replace government. And it certainly doesn't replace that judgment factor that I often speak and write a lot about. One of the biggest risks I see is that false confidence created by automation. When organizations assume that because the system accepted it or populates, a report, or that decision behind it must be compliant, right? They stop asking harder questions. That system becomes a justification rather than a tool. And so you have to be very cautious. We're not going to ever take away that critical thinking, that judgment from the contracting piece. We can speed up reviews. We can speed up things. However, you still have to be that expert. You still have to know what is being produced from any of the automation, the AI tools. And so it's going to fail. It's going to fail often, but the improvements are going to come from those organizations that have the right people that know how to use it to make them better, to set them apart from anyone else to do business with the government.
Right. Well, I know from just my experience, I know the government does kind of want the systems to be functional and, have, system capabilities. So at least the information is being tracked properly and funds are being separated, and you can identify, the specific funds, the funds and the spending, for those particular funds through, a system. But it needs to be set up right. But in your view, what do organizations must understand about adequate systems and internal controls?
Sure. Sometimes, systems fail most often when decision authority, review responsibility, and escalation paths aren't clearly defined on the human side. So even if you have the best systems and they can amplify mistakes when ownership is unclear, a workflow that routes a decision through 5 people is worthless if none of those 5 people think they're the one who's supposed to actually make a decision. So that technology needs to support disciplined behavior, not substitute for it. The systems are going to make it easier to do the right thing, but it shouldn't be the thing that defines what right is for your organization.
Yeah, definitely. Now I don't so much do interim management. I do implementation of computer systems, and I do a lot with governments, state and local and county, and tribal organizations and things like that. And so I've seen a lot of things when it comes to systems. And just be getting them, like you said, getting it to the right decision maker and having the right oversight, you know, as to whether this is the decision or not the decision. I think people just think, oh, things are just going to go faster. No, it's building controls, but is it the right control? That's what's really, really important. Is this the right control?
Because
You
it's
can
going
have
to go
all kinds
faster.
of systems. Yeah.
You can save time, money, and it's going to look pretty, and
Mhm.
it's great. But then, and you see it a lot with, now from the law side and hallucinations and making up
Yeah.
cases. And so that's the dangerous part is people
Mhm.
are actually relying on these tools 100%. They're not
Mhm.
checking it. They're not maximizing its full potential. The speed is there, but relying on it without checking is
Right.
dangerous.
Yeah, in fact, that's kind of like my pet peeve right now. Yes, we have systems here. It might make it faster, but you still need to know what the answer is that you're supposed to be getting. You still need to know what you're trying to achieve and make sure that goal is met. You just can't put data in and then let the system do whatever it wants to do, and then you think it's right. You're supposed to know whether or not this is right or wrong. You're supposed to know whether or not it followed the process you expected and met the compliance. Even though someone put it in, configured it in all these other ways, they were listening to people who may not have known, as though now it was configured wrong and you're not meeting the goals. So you need to know what the expectation is. That means you need to understand the flow of information, the guidelines that are running those those flow of information, and know what the expected end should be. Okay, so I've been working a long time. I started with first PC, so I've done a lot of software
You've seen it
configuration and
evolve different
design
ways.
and writing and stuff like that, but we always double check to make sure, hand calculations, that it did what we expected it to do, or we went back and started programming what we had written. But like I said, they're just throwing AI in and said, "Well, it's going to machine learn." Yeah, yeah, but it might be learning some wrong stuff because it is not right to start with,
There you
and
go.
that's a problem. And I enjoy the fact that we've gotten to AI. I mean, like I said, I saw the first PC, so I'm excited about new technology that's coming in, but let's make sure it's right. Make sure you got all the loops in. Make sure you understand all the flows so it does go through all the loops and gets you to the right answer. So,
Oh,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Just don't say, oh, we got a software and think everything's good. It's only as good as those that were part of the implementation. So,
Well, I think, unfortunately, more often than not, we're going to see probably more issues of just reliance,
right.
on it because the answer it provides looks good. It does.
Hmm.
I've played
Hmm.
around with it all the time. And sometimes I get frustrated because it took me more time to argue with, LLM, whichever one. And it's like, I know what the answer is. I just needed some help to reframe it or, you
Hmm.
know, critically, pressure test something. And
Right, right.
I should have just went with what I thought. And so, yeah, if you throw something in there, it's going to give you an answer that
Hmm.
seems legit, but
Yeah.
it may
It,
not be, and it could cause you a whole lot of issues if you
it
pass
can,
it on.
yeah, yeah. And if you don't get down to the very nth, you know, uh, base for it to know where to look for all of its data and build upward, and you just start at the surface, like you say, you're going to get hallucinations, you're going to get all kinds of stuff in there, and it's not accurate, and you're going to be trying to fight for information that it's easy to prove that it's wrong. So don't forget the old process of just knowing what it's for, who needs to see it, who needs to approve it, how many signatures need to be on there to say, I saw this because you're part of the programs. I mean, you just need to have that oversight.
And that's
And
easy. That's the easy part.
that is the easy,
It
but
really is.
you just
Just
can't
set it up.
imagine how difficult it is.
But it is the easiest. However, I've seen it as the hardest. I think
Yeah.
I enjoy being
Yeah.
on the industry side because while the government sometimes is reactive. We can be a little more proactive on this side, especially with the right people to, hey, yeah, sometimes we are rushing just as much, if not more, on our end to get the government something, but we can plan a little bit better and have the ability to do that. And that's what's really been exciting thus far for me.
Right. So pre-submission compliance validation. Do you see more organizations validating compliance and assumptions before submissions and reports? And what difference does that make?
You know what, and I do, especially on this side, and on the government side, you'd see it a little bit in proposals. However, again, with just more audits, more scrutiny on programs, I do think I see folks talking about it. It's something internally that I'm a part of, to where, yeah, it is happening a lot more, and it can make a significant difference. It forces conversations that are uncomfortable early, but far more damaging when they happen later. It's also expensive, and not just financially, but reputationally and relationally. By the time a problem shows up in a report or an invoice, your options are extremely limited. You're no longer deciding how to structure the approach. You're deciding how to explain why the approach you already took was reasonable.
Yeah, and you definitely don't want to be on the side where they're saying that the program was not executed successfully, it was not managed well. You just don't want that said, because that's going to travel with the organization for quite a while, and it could end up preventing you from getting any future funding from anyone, not just the federal government, because they're going to be looking at other reports that are going to be coming out, and they're going to be looking to see how well you execute your programs and manage the monies and things like that. So you don't want to wait too late to go in and try to get some of that validation done and stuff like that.
Yeah, make it part of the process. Check in often with how you're doing. Don't wait until, again, the end or an interim CPARS is required. Get out there and, hey, are we doing well? Are we meeting the compliance needs of the contract?
Right.
It's transparency and gives you time to address it or document, hey, we were doing fine. We asked, they said nothing was going on wrong. But then at the end, if they're like, oh, you didn't meet it, it just helps defend your case too.
Right. It does. It does. It really does. I've seen that happen. So you were a former contracting officer. So what is the contracting officer's role beyond oversight and enforcement? And does judgment factor enter into that role?
Oh, yeah. I'm here today, and doing what I do and what I love because of my time as a contracting officer. And it was, it's not something that, if you go to college, you're like, hey, I'm going to go become a contracting officer. You really don't know that it exists. And so their role really does extend far beyond oversight enforcement, but it can get lost in a lot of that at times. And so in those responsibilities, they're foundational, they're unavoidable. Every decision a contracting officer makes has to be defensible. And that reality fundamentally shapes how they operate, what they can say, and when they can engage. There's personal liability you have to take into account based on decisions. What silence sometimes means, that kind of can get really frustrating. I can't get in touch of them. What's going on? Do they not want to talk to me? And that's really not the case. I don't think most of the time. They're just so busy. But I get it. It can sound like they're not interested. Well, maybe it's restraint. Maybe they just can't say, something to you. And what I always try to do and be is transparent, saying what I could say, working within the gray area. And over time, you get more comfortable with that experience. And sometimes you're in a really impossible position. The hardest part is sometimes seeing problems developing. And sometimes you can't really intervene until they reach a point that justifies intervention. Whether it's contractors making assumptions that could cause problems later, but if it's in a proposal stage, you may need to enter discussions, but also be fair to all of the authors. So timing really matters. Do you wait? Do you not wait? But sometimes that position, it's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't sat in that seat, because from the outside looking in, it looks like inaction or indifference, but from the inside, it's sometimes calculated restraint. And the hardest part is sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you wait and the problem gets worse. An intervention could have been the right call. And so the job requires constant judgment about when either silence protects the process or when silence enables risk. You always don't get it right.
Right. Yeah, but if you haven't talked to that contracting officer, you know, in 3 months, you need to call today, because you need to, you know, talk with them and get to the point where, like I said, it's a monthly conversation at the minimum, so that they can help guide you. They know the rules, they know the laws, they know where you might end up getting off track or whatever, and they're wanting you to succeed in this, you know, program that you're in. So don't be afraid to contact them and communicate with them, and let them help be your guide, so that you don't, go the wrong direction or step into a situation that's going to be devastating for the organization. Um, Budgets and cost review. When budgets and costs are reviewed, how should organizations view that process from a risk and governance standpoint?
Yeah, and I think this is where sometimes I'll talk to that gotcha moment that you reference. And budget and cost reviews, they can feel like it, and I get it, but they're really not. And I know they're experienced that way, and I do understand why. By the time those reviews happen, you've already incurred costs, probably you've made decisions, so it feels like you're being judged in hindsight for choices that made sense when you made them. From the government's perspective, those reviews are often the last safe opportunity to resolve misalignment before it becomes some type of formal finding or a question cost. They're checkpoints, but organizations that approach them defensively are going to tend to miss that opportunity. From that government standpoint, the reviews should be viewed as risk reduction events. They're a chance to surface issues like we've talked about, clarify assumptions, but then course correct while there's still that flexibility. You treat it as adversarial, they create the very dynamic that you're trying to avoid.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, there's situations like you have put together a budget for this specific program, but you get in there and you find out there was something else that was going on that you need to take care of in this program for it to be successful. And now you realize you have a cost that you did not budget for. The thing is to call that contracting officer and say, I think I'm going to need to do a budget revision, and I'm going to need to move funds from this particular area of the program over to here, because we have some other areas that we have to clean up before we can actually proceed with what it is we need to do. So, contacting that contracting officer and telling them what the problem is. Don't wait till the last minute and end up with disallowed costs. Tell them what's going on, and then try to get permission to be able to do a budget revision, so you can reallocate the funds to the places that are most needed.
Yeah, the worst thing you could do is not have a conversation, because I tell people all the time, most often you're going to hear no. I mean, it's no different than a sales type environment. Again, you are active on LinkedIn, there's a sales piece. It is, contractors are selling different things to the government that they are unable to do themselves. And so you kind of have to take that into account and approach it that way. But again, have those conversations. Don't wait. It's just not going to work out, because I've seen it happen way too many times. And I get it. You don't want to try not to upset someone, the government. You want to maintain a good relationship, but it's going to create some friction just down the road if things surface. And you can inherit or take on an acceptable level of risk depending on the contract type, and firm fixed price. That's just part of it. But there is a point where that risk crosses over into, well, we need to have a conversation. We need to see if there's some room for adjustments. but having that relationship and being transparent is just going to help solve the problem. There's a lot of flexibility that can be provided in those instances.
But who is typically responsible for amendments and changes? And why do unclear change authorities create compliance risk?
Sure. I think a lot of this does go to things we've talked about where, you're not often engaging with that contracting officer on a daily basis. However, they are usually the only ones that can authorize changes to the contract. And so having unclear authority up front, depending on who you're dealing with on a daily basis, sometimes can create situations where if you're not asking and getting a clear understanding up front with who those authority figures are, you run the risk of just, hey, if someone tells you they want something else or done differently and you do it, well, if that contracting officer wasn't aware and did not know, or you didn't notify them, well, all of a sudden you may be in a position where it's hard to recover if you incurred some additional cost or need more time. And so informal changes can feel efficient in the moment. Both sides can agree that everything makes sense operationally. It's needed. Just doesn't maybe align with the contract or an assumption. And so this is where documentation and that communication piece needs to happen. And so again, the kind of central theme here of know your contracting officer, know who has authority on a contract. And so again, it's going to be much harder to justify change after the fact than to justify it prospectively.
Right. From your experience, where do organizations most often underestimate oversight scrutiny?
Sure. A lot of times oversight reviews look beyond policies and procedures. Reviewers pay attention to consistency between what an organization says and what it does. Then they notice cultural signals, things that aren't documented but are visible in how people talk about decisions, how they explain variances, and whether they take accountability or deflect it. Integration across functions is one of the most underestimated areas of scrutiny. Finance, contracts, operations, HR. When these functions are disconnected, it's going to create gaps and inconsistencies that are extremely visible during these reviews. And then when different teams give different answers to the same question, well, that inconsistency is often more concerning than any single mistake, because then it signals that the organization doesn't have a shared understanding of its own operations.
Yeah, that's why I can't emphasize enough about needing to have meetings with your finance staff, HR staff, or whoever all might be involved in the execution of this program. You need to be meeting on a regular basis, communicating so everybody understands what you're doing, where you're spending, why you're spending what you're doing, get justification, and then everybody else is supporting what you're doing because they understand what you're doing. But you're right, they do talk to other departments and they come up with a different explanation. You're going to have a little difficult time explaining that things are organized and that you are efficient and effective in what you're handling.
And everyone has their own role. And where I've seen now on this side, and just bringing all these functions together, having those conversations, we're making great progress on just being able to know what everyone's talking about, engage with the government the right way. We're all on the same page. We're all intertwined, and we're accomplishing some really cool things just because of that, because everyone realizes the importance, and that makes then the engagement piece with the government that much easier.
I know one of the things you're probably looking at on a regular basis is financial stability and risk indicators, whether or not they're going to be stable enough, to complete the task. When several issues exist, how does risk compound, and what does that mean for continued funding?
Sure. Risk compounds in ways that isolated issues don't. One late invoice, it's explainable. Two might be coincidental. When I see the same types of issues repeating across multiple reviews, whether it's finance, cash flow issues, delayed indirect rate submissions, inconsistent cost allocations. Well, that pattern erodes confidence. And it's not because an organization was inherently bad or trying to do anything wrong, but because repeated issues signal that the organization isn't learning from previous problems. They're treating each issue as isolated rather than symptomatic. And then that's where risk starts to compound.
Yeah. Risk of them finishing the program and risk of the funds being properly spent and a lot of different things. So, yeah, there's a lot that's looked at. And so, you really have to work hard to get that act together so that all the communication is being done not only internally, but you are communicating externally with your contracting officer and different things like that. From your experience on both sides of federal contracting, how should organizations think about cost principles and cost allowability, big one, in practice, particularly when navigating gray areas and compliance expectations?
Oh, yeah. And cost principles, I do feel, are often misunderstood as very rigid rules, binary determinations of allowable versus unallowable. But really, they require significant judgment. These determinations on allowability, allocability, and reasonableness, they're determinations, not equations. So they depend on context, timing, and the specific facts of the situation. And as a contracting officer, I rarely asked whether a cost was perfect. That's not the standard. We need to ask whether the decision was reasonable and documented at the time it was made. When a contractor can walk through their thinking, explain what they considered, what alternatives they evaluated, and why they made the choice they did, those conversations are going to go very differently than when they defaulted to, that's just how we do it. It's not a defense. It might explain consistency, but it doesn't demonstrate that judgment. And so in those cost principle evaluations, judgment is what matters.
Right. And then understanding, like you say, the indirect cost rates and things like that, and knowing when they're even coming up with that, that they did not include expenses that are not considered part of an indirect cost. So there's just so many different, things that that needed. You just have to know.
You gotta understand.
And
if you
someone like David is going to help you know that.
Exactly.
Just tell them. They don't bite. They're there to help you. For the audience, can you please let us know how they might get in contact with you if they would like to just chat and get some information and who knows, some support and help?
Oh, sure. Yeah. David Neal on LinkedIn. You can email me at dneal@dawsonohana, DAWSONOHANA. And I also put my phone number in there as well. So I always enjoy talking about this stuff. Questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're wondering what you need to be doing or kind of concerned or just feeling like you may not quite be on the right track, you need someone like David to just kind of help you, maybe just get that confidence, just chatting with them, and they'll help you to get that confidence so you're on the right track and you can just really start going for your program and making it all that you wanted it to be and helping all of the people that you wanted to help. But I just want to throw this little thing out there. If people are saying, well, I just really don't want to do all of this and this, that, and the other. So I just want to say this. The government, when they are providing these funds for you to do your program, those funds are taxpayer dollars. Now, you being a taxpayer, I know you don't want your money wasted. I know you don't want them spending it on things that are not part of the program. You want it to be tracked. You want it to be monitored. You want it to be correct. You want it to be, precise, because it's your tax dollars. You don't want it wasted. We hate paying those taxes in the first place. Let's just tell the truth. But they are used for good purposes. And since they are, you want those funds tracked so that they're being used for the best purposes possible. So that's why this is all happening, because they're trust dollars. Okay? So we're going to call them and we're going to do our job and we're going to do a whole lot better, right? I know we are.
We'll make strides.
Yes. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I think we have more to talk about. I might have to have you come back for, episode 2.
I'm all for it. This has been great. And again, I am happy to talk to whomever, be back on this. This has been fun. I really enjoyed it.
This is and a lot of information, and there's more to come. So we'll have to have David come back again to give us even more information so that you can succeed in your programs and your fundings and help the people that you dream of helping. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to A Sharp Outlook today. And I want you to share this information with others that you know. And we're always here on Mondays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time. And we're here to help you be informed. And what I always say every week, if you don't do anything else, stay informed. I want to thank you for joining us on A Sharp Outlook. We have been informed and energized to take the next steps. We have posted links to websites and videos to learn more on today's topic. Please join us again next week for another thought-provoking conversation right here on K4 HD Radio and Talk 4 TV. Listen to the podcast on all the podcast apps. And until next week, stay informed.